Mandy, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mandy Wong. I'm an API and integration specialist at Suncor Energy. I am a Mulesoft architect and developer there, and I'm a strong believer in accelerating digital transformation through building APIs. And on to Amit.
Thanks, Mandy. Hi, Dave. My name is Amit. I'm a senior solution architect in Mulesoft. I belong to professional services group, which works very closely with customer success. So I have more than 5 years of experience working in Mulesoft technologies, and I'm familiar with Cloud Hub, on-prem, and RTF deployment models. And recently, we started exploring RTF on self-managed Kubernetes. So that's again an area that we are exploring together with the customers. Prior to Mulesoft, I have had experience working with other integration tools like IBM, Dell Boomi, Apigee, and great to be part of this meetup. Back to you, Jimmy.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Amit. So let's quickly go through the agenda for today. First of all, I will just touch on the meetup logistics just to show you how this meetup will go along the way. Then I'll bounce the ball to Mandy to speak about the customer perspective. So Mandy, coming from Suncor, she has already started the implementation of the RTF within her organization. She has different perspective about RTF implementation, and she would like to share with us today. So we'll hear from her. And then we'll talk about the different deployment models, including the RTF for sure, compared to the other deployment models. We'll have a quick introduction about the RTF itself. And then we will compare RTF versus the self-managed Kubernetes model that got GA'd recently. Then we will go through trivia questions. This is probably the favorite part for our meetup attendees. So we will be asking 3 trivia questions along the way. The answer should be within the presentation itself. So if you are paying attention as we go, the first winner on each question will get a prize from Mulesoft. It's going to be a free training and certification. So looking forward to that. And then Amit will go through an implementation demo for RTF. And then at the last topic, we will just wrap up and announce the trivia winners. Let's go quickly through the meetup logistics. So this session is recorded, and we'll try to upload a copy on our meetup portal. The attendees, all of the attendees except for the speakers, will be on mute upon entry. So please use the chat section to post any questions you have or anything that you would like to communicate with us. Use the chat section for that. Again, I touched on the 3 trivia questions, so they will be after the presentation. Instruction will be provided for the trivia question. So before we start going through each one of those trivia questions, and before we start answering the question, I will go through a certain rules in order to make sure that we capture the right winners. So pay attention to that piece. And then the prize will be announced at the very end. With that, I will stop talking, and I'll bounce to Mandy to talk about her experience with RTF.
Thank you, Jim. So I want to speak about my customer perspective using RTF. Now, as he alluded to before, we are currently in the process of migrating our APIs from on-prem to RTF. And we've just come up with a bunch of questions and challenges that we've encountered. So first of all, when we go to RTF, we're thinking, why not just go fully cloud? Like, there's a lot of work going to RTF itself, rather than just letting Mulesoft to manage all our APIs if we were to go to cloud. So that was a huge question there. And then what are the differences between RTF on a virtual machine and bare metal versus a self-managed Kubernetes? So VMs include Azure and AWS, and for our friends who use Google Cloud Platform, it's treated like a data center because there are not yet scripts to run RTF directly on GCP. And what are the different things to consider between these 2 models? When we migrate API projects from on-prem to RTF, it is known that some or most connectors will behave differently they will most likely break because, say, for example, you have a file connector you're using on-prem, and when you move to RTF, you're no longer sitting on the same server. So what are things to keep in mind when you migrate APIs with these connectors to prevent projects from breaking? And how do CI/CD tools change going to RTF, such as GitHub and Jenkins? Because we've had a situation where our Jenkins pipeline wasn't working when we went to RTF. So was there something extra that we needed to do? And how can we best set up our infrastructure on self-managed Kubernetes to support runtime fabric? And what are the best practices for achieving API security? Because that's always top of mind. And are there anything that we need to really pay attention and focus on? And lastly, when we decommission APIs, how do we go about it in runtime fabric? Like, what's the life cycle in runtime fabric for APIs? Is it the same as on-prem, or there are different things we need to take into consideration? So I hope the presentation and demo today will help us answer all of these questions.
Thank you, Mandy. Thanks for giving us that overview of how you're doing your migration journey. We aim to cover most of your questions in our presentation today. Before we jump into the addressing the questions, I wanted to talk a little bit about the fundamentals, right? Most of the joinees in the meetup today are new to the platform. So I want to give you a brief overview of what are the different deployment models that we have within Anypoint platform, and tell a little bit about what are the differences, right, within those deployment models. So let's get started on that. If you look at the Anypoint platform, we have divided our platform into different components, right? If you see on the Anypoint platform pane, we have the design center, the management center, and Anypoint Exchange. These are basically hosted in our management plane, which is a web application. We call it a management plane. And if you see at the bottom, we have the actual new runtimes. These are the runtimes that are deployed within the customer's on-premise infrastructure. Maybe it is hosted by Mulesoft in their cloud app, or it could be hosted somewhere in their AWS, Azure, or GCP, right? So the new runtimes have the capability to be hosted in different environments. Like we mentioned, the top portion is the management control plane, which is the web app, which is hosted in Mulesoft's cloud app. The next is the runtime plane, which can be hosted with an on-premise cloud app or cloud provider of your choice. Just take a look at the deployment models side by side. As I told you, the deployment model that you choose could dictate where your mule runtime is running, right? If you choose a fully managed cloud solution, which is our cloud app solution, all the Mule applications along with the management plane are hosted in our cloud app. So you can see in this diagram that the management plane along with the Mule runtimes is hosted in our cloud. So it is the responsibility of Mule as a product to maintain and support these applications within cloud app. Next comes the runtime fabric. In runtime fabric, so it's kind of a combined solution. In runtime fabric, the management solution, management plane resides in our cloud app. It is managed by Mulesoft, and we actually run the hosted in customer's infrastructure. So the infrastructure is provided by the customer, but the runtime images that we run on those infrastructures are managed by Mule. So that's why appliance and the RTF services that we use for our runtime fabric are managed by Mulesoft, and the infrastructure is hosted by customers. So this is a key differentiator when you compare runtime fabric with the on-premise runtime. Hybrid, again, is a combination when you use cloud app along with runtime fabric, that could be termed as a hybrid deployment model. This was one of the deployment models that we had when I was working with a customer. So hybrid deployment model means that. On-premises runtimes. So on-premise runtimes are basically hosted on customers' infrastructure. Those are the standalone runtimes that kind of run the Mule runtime within customers' data center. As you can see, the difference between runtime fabric and on-premises, the runtime are completely hosted on customers' data center. This could also be AWS, Azure, but they could be the VM machines that you use. So this is on-premises runtime. And finally, we have another offering which is called PCE. PCE basically also has the management plane as well as the Mule runtimes hosted in customers' infrastructure. This is not a widely used deployment model with our customers, and it also lacks few features that when you compare it with CloudHub, which is our most commonly used deployment model. So these are the different deployment models that we have today. Now let's talk about some of the common deployment models and what are the feature comparisons between them, right? We have CloudHub, which is the most commonly used deployment model by our customers. The way we achieve high availability in CloudHub is using multiple workers. Since we use AWS in the backend, when you deploy new applications in different workers, you are able to achieve HA. Another features to note here is CloudHub also supports Anypoint MQ, which is a CloudHub hosted solution, multi-tenant solution, and you can also use Secrets Manager. Secrets Manager can be used to store your certificates and manage your proxies when you're using CloudHub. Again, the monitoring for CloudHub is very much advanced, and you can see all the statistics within the built-in monitoring dashboards and also the classic application monitoring. Then comes the standalone Mule install. So this is the Mule runtime, which is hosted by customer. And all the Mule applications that are running in the customer infrastructure share the same Mule runtime. The way you can achieve HA in the standalone Mule runtime is you can create server groups, so multiple servers sharing the same application, or you can create clustering. The monitoring, again, if you have a Titanium subscription of Mulesoft, you can see all the monitoring dashboards in the Mule control plane, or you can do classic application monitoring, which could be done through an monitoring agent such as App Dynamics or Datadog, right? Whichever is native to your organization. We do provide dashboards for servers, server groups, and clusters in our control plane as well. We provide basic dashboards if you are having base subscription, but if you have Titanium subscription, we provide some advanced monitoring as well. Finally, the runtime fabric, which is kind of interest for everyone today. In runtime fabric, HA is achieved by deploying the runtime fabric application to multiple worker nodes. So runtime fabric, once we dive deep into this, we'll understand what a worker node is. Runtime fabric also has added advantage where you could use the Anypoint security product. So that product is only compatible with runtime fabric appliance model, and you could use features such as edge security, the tokenization, and secrets manager along with it. Dashboards and monitoring, if you have advanced monitoring, you can see all that dashboards in our control plane. But if you need some base monitoring, we also have Ops Center that we provide along with runtime fabric. So these are the different differences. The benefits, again, we just talked about. You could have in CloudHub, you could deploy the applications in different separate regions of AWS, and that region does not need to be the same region where the control plane is. So that's an added advantage. You just need, you don't need to do different configuration. You just need to define the size of worker and the number of workers, and all the automation is done in the background, and you can run your application easily in CloudHub. HA across availability zones. If you're having a cloud application deployed within a region, the way you can achieve HA is deploy the applications in different availability zones. Some of the additional services, of course, are Object Store V2, Secrets Manager, Anypoint MQ. In standalone Mule runtime, you have the flexibility to deploy it within your data center. You can choose Azure or AWS. You can have, if you have constraints where you want to make sure that the data does not flow outside your data center, then this deployment model better suits, right? And then again, the connectivity to the control plane is achieved using our agent that kind of manages the deployment of runtimes in your infrastructure. And finally, the runtime fabric. the runtime fabric, the added advantage is it gives you the capability of using your native cloud services, and it also gives you the ability to use multiple runtimes. So same as Cloud Hub, Runtime Fabric allows you to stay with the latest Mule runtime, and you can have one Mule runtime working on one runtime Mule version and another runtime working on different version. It gives you the ability to isolate apps. You can have a separate container for each Mule application and avoid noisy neighbor problems. You can scale horizontally or by adding more workers, or vertically by adding more cores, right? Finally, again, you are able to connect this solution as well as to the control plane to have a uniform way of interacting with your Mule applications. Okay, so that was the overview of different deployment models. We covered very basic differences, and now we'll jump into the introduction to Runtime Fabric. Now, there was a question which Mandy raised at the start of the presentation when she was presenting her challenges. Where does Runtime Fabric fit? Why not just use Mule Cloud Hub solution? So the advantage of using Runtime Fabric is, if you have an existing cloud infrastructure, right? Some customers have a large presence in AWS or Azure, and they don't want another SaaS provider to come into the picture and then you manage that. So in those situations, you could think about Runtime Fabric, and this could be a solution for hosting your Mule applications. Some customers have ongoing Kubernetes initiatives, and they want to make sure that they stay on the latest and greatest technologies. So you could use Runtime Fabric in those scenarios. There is another requirement for some customers. They could use standalone runtime, but that standalone runtime is kind of shared within your JPM, right, for all the Mule applications. But you need some kind of isolation and automation of updating your Mule runtimes. In those cases, you can think about using Runtime Fabric, because it uses the container technology, and it also helps you automate the orchestration and deployment of your Mule applications. And finally, there is some customers who have a strict requirement where they cannot host their applications or data in any third-party cloud provider. Then in those cases, Runtime Fabric suits as a better solution. It gives you the advantages of isolation and automation, as well as complies with your company standards. So now jumping into what is AnyPoint Runtime Fabric, right? So we talked a little bit about what the solution means, but the advantages is you can centrally manage all the application. So if you have a hybrid deployment model where you have Cloud Hub as well as Runtime Fabric, it allows you to centrally manage all the Mule applications deployed in your organization using the management plane. So you'll see the uniform experience when you're using Runtime Manager to manage all the Runtime Fabric applications. The Mule applications are run on Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is like the newer technology. All the customers who are trying to stay with the latest trends are trying to get into the containerization model, and RTF is basically a solution that answers all that questions. It gives you the containerization benefits along with the isolation for each Mule application. It also has capabilities as zero downtime deployment, which has another advantage when you compare it with standalone runtimes. And again, how do you take advantage of the management plane? With the management plane and combination of Runtime Fabric on customer-hosted infrastructure, you're easily able to pivot your deployments. If you have an application which you want to move from Cloud Hub to RTF, within few clicks and few changes, you can easily move that application to Runtime Fabric without a large impact to your dev work. Deep into different flavors of Runtime Fabric. So earlier, we just had one flavor of Runtime Fabric, which was the appliance model, which Mandy was talking about. So RTF could be installed on VMs and bare metal. So if you're thinking about VMs, it could be your AWS, Azure, and when you talk about bare metal servers, it could be something that is your data center and is hosted within your data center. What this appliance model does is we supply RTF services along with an appliance. And that appliance kind of has different services such as the Docker services, the Kubernetes, the Flannel, and the Ops Center. We ask the customers to bring in their own hardware, and then we install runtime fabric on that particular hardware. So as you can see in the diagram, the yellow portion is customer managed. All the hardware is procured by the customer, and then we provide the appliance model scripts, and then customer installs the RTF on that. Along with the appliance, we also provide RTF services, which are kind of used to manage the connect communication with the control plane, and also deploy the Mule applications in your infrastructure. So this is the appliance model. It has bundled in the Kubernetes, Docker, and an Ops Center as well. So just understanding the shared responsibility model, right? What Mulesoft manages is the Mule runtime. When you're talking about runtime fabric, the runtime fabric components or services that we talked about, the runtime fabric appliance, which contains the Ops Center, the Docker, the Flannel, and different services that we provide. What is the responsibility of customer? They need to procure the hardware, right? They need to decide which operating system that you want to use. So if it's a runtime fabric appliance, it has to be either Red Hat or it has to be CentOS. Then they need to procure the virtual machines that they are going to run those OS on, and also the disk and the hardware infrastructure. When you're using the RTF appliance model, we have some strict requirements on what the infrastructure should be and what the requirements should be for those infrastructures. We have defined all those in our prerequisites when you start installing RTF. So this is a logical diagram, I would say, of an appliance model. In appliance model, there is a concept called as controller VMs and worker VMs. So this controller VMs are basically used to manage the different upgrades, Ops Center or ingress controller. When you're using the appliance model, we supply you with the ingress controller as well. So ingress controller is essentially your load balancer that manages the traffic, distributes the traffic between different Mule runtimes. You can see in this model, we have 3 controller nodes and 3 worker nodes. So this is like the minimum required configuration when you're running RTF appliance model in production. You have to have minimum 3 controller, 3 worker nodes. And in the worker nodes, you can see there is log forwarding services, which kind of help you send logs to Mule control plane, or you can send it to external services such as Splunk, CloudWatch, or choice of your whatever your organization is using. And we'll show you all that when Amit shows the demo of all the services. So this was the appliance model. I hope you got a little bit overview of what it is. It has the concept of worker controller node and worker nodes. Now this is the new flavor of RTF that we have recently introduced as of November 2020. It was basically we had a lot of customer requests where they wanted to use their own Kubernetes to manage runtime fabric services. So we kind of heard to that demand, and we released this new deployment model which runs runtime fabric services on customers' Kubernetes. So right now we are supporting EKS, which is Amazon's Kubernetes service, and AKS, which is Azure Kubernetes service. What it does is we still run the runtime fabric Mule applications on your infrastructure, but you get the flexibility to choose the Kubernetes of your choice. You also get the flexibility to choose what is the load balancer that you want to use, what is the external log forwarding solution that you want to use. So this solution is basically giving you more flexibilities and to comply with whatever standards you have set within your organization. So this is the newest deployment model that we have. And we still have runtime fabric services that we install. Those services are essential to manage the communication between your runtime application in your EKS or AKS and your control plane. There is also anypoint monitoring agent. If you have a Titanium subscription, we still have capability for you to do monitoring using anypoint monitoring agent. Like I said, this model is only supported on EKS and AKS today. What this gives an advantage to the customer is you are able to use the latest management and monitoring features of the Anypoint platform. you use the latest Mule runtimes, right? You're still able to take advantages of isolation. You're able to do deployments similar to CloudHub, where you could choose the latest Mule runtime and also provide isolation to the applications. What it helps with the customers' ops team is they get to choose their own infrastructure, the way they want to set it up, and they also get the flexibility to choose their own configurations for ingress, log forwarding, monitoring, for example, so they can choose their own native solutions. So if we compare the solutions side by side for both the deployment models, you can see on the left-hand side is the appliance model. On the right-hand side is the RTF on AKS and EKS. Again, the major differences to note here is we have controller nodes in appliance model, worker nodes. Worker nodes host the Mule applications. Each worker node has a pod. Within each pod, we have a Mule runtime, and in that Mule runtime, we are running a Mule application. So that's the way Runtime Fabric installs Mule applications in a pod, in a worker node. Controller nodes, again, like I explained, they are basically used to control the traffic for all the Mule applications in worker nodes. They have the agent services that take care of the communication between control plane and the controller nodes. The right-hand side, if you see, this is the RTF on AKS and EKS. No more controller nodes. The concept of controller nodes is taken away in this. This is a huge, cost savings for some of the customers who don't want to incur additional cost of having controller nodes. We still have some runtime fabric services that we run. An example of that is the RTF agent, the runtime agent, Mule RTM agent, that takes care of the communication from your worker nodes to the control plane. Ingress controller is, again, like I mentioned, is responsibility of customers. You could choose any load balancer of your choice. It can be Nginx, native ELB for Amazon, or you can use something like an Ambassador, which is an open source load balancer. So this flexibility is a huge advantage, and we are seeing a lot of adoption for this particular model today. Moving on. So to talk more about the benefits of RTF on AKS and EKS, right? Like I mentioned, the RTF, AKS, EKS model replaces controller nodes, so you don't need to provision the controller nodes, and it kind of takes the cost on the lower side. Lower infrastructure cost. The appliance model, like I mentioned, we had some prerequisites where we needed you to provision disks which are needed with high IOPS, and that's added cost for the customers. With the BYOK model, or the self-managed Kubernetes model, we are allowing our customers to choose the infrastructure of their choice. We are also giving them flexibility. Like I said, you're able to choose your own ingress configurations. You're able to choose the log forwarding solution, and also monitoring solutions to manage your runtime fabrics. And finally, less overhead. What used to happen is when we were interacting with the customers, they were spending a lot of time managing the RTF appliance model, which was taking their focus away from building new applications to maintaining runtime fabric. With the new RTF on AKS EKS model, this responsibility is going to shift towards the ops team. We are asking customers to bring in their Kubernetes experts and ask them to maintain the RTF clusters while the developers focus on building new applications. So that's the intent of having this new deployment model as well. This is a key features differentiation of the RTF on EKS and AKS versus the VM bare metal model. We are still supporting deploying Mule applications on both, right? This is the RTF on AKS. We support deploying proxies and Mule applications on that, as well as the appliance model on the right side. Kubernetes and Docker, we do not include the Kubernetes. Customers bring their own Kubernetes, which could be AKS and EKS, which provision the Kubernetes with it. And on RTF and appliance, we supply the Kubernetes along with the appliance. So you don't need to have expertise in Kubernetes. You just need to have basic understanding, and you can run the appliance model. Support for installing on any Linux distribution. RTF on AKS, EKS, we are giving you the flexibility to choose the operating system of your choice, but it has to be Linux. And on RTF and appliance model, we only support Red Hat and CentOS today. Also, there is different versions that we support, and it's a 3 weeks delay whenever Red Hat introduces a new version. We support it with RTF as well. Now, supporting node auto-scaling. This is another feature that was more asked frequently to us by the customers, where they wanted some kind of auto-scaling for their RTF appliance model. It is not supported today in the appliance model. While in the RTF on EKS and AKS, Azure and AWS have native auto-scaling features, which you can leverage when you're using RTF on self-managed Kubernetes. Log forwarding solution, like we discussed, customers bring their own log forwarding solutions for the new self-managed Kubernetes. While on the appliance model, we supply the log forwarding solution, and then you can choose which where you want to send the logs externally. Internal load balancers, we do not supply the load balancers in appliance model. Sorry, the self-managed Kubernetes. Customers bring their own load balancers, while in the appliance model, the load balancer is included, and we take care of configuring it once you supply some basic information for the load balancers. Anypoint security product. So this is an added SKU that we have within our platform. Anypoint security product is basically a product which provides you a perimeter security for your RTF clusters. Anypoint security can only be used with the RTF appliance model. Anypoint security is not supported for RTF on self-managed Kubernetes today. So if you have a requirement where you need some tokenization, or you need WAF policies to be applied to your RTF, then RTF on AKS and EKS is not a solution for you. So if you want anypoint security, we ask the customers to use the RTF appliance model, which is the VM and bare metal. Finally, the Ops Center. We are not giving Ops Center with the self-managed Kubernetes. Customers bring in their own monitoring solution. But if you have a Titanium subscription, we do have an anypoint monitoring agent that runs in your RTF workers, and we do provide those stats in your control plane. In the appliance model, we include the Ops Center, where you can do basic monitoring of your servers, your RTF pods, and also do some diagnostics on that. Yep. So there was another question that Mandy asked us. Okay, so I understand the RTF model, but what is the difference when we are going to deploy an application? Take an example of CloudHub or standalone to RTF, right? So RTF introduces another concept when you're deploying an application to your runtimes. What you need to do in RTF is there is an extra step where, if you are a developer, consider this user as a developer. Developer needs to make sure that he uploads the app, which is a jar that you're using for Mule application, to Anypoint Exchange. So that jar needs to be residing in Anypoint Exchange to be deployed to the runtime fabric. Once you send a deployment request, the runtime agent gets the request. You kind of create a deployment, right, in your control plane. And that request goes forward. This is the ingress, the K8, all this yellow section is your RTF. Once you get it in the RTF cluster, the request starts creating a pod. So if you are creating a single pod, then it will, if you're asking for a single replica, then it will create one pod. Now you need an image in the pod where you need to run the Mule runtime. To retrieve the Mule runtime image, suppose you selected Mule runtime as 4.3. To get that image, the services within the RTF cluster reach out to the image repo that is hosted in Mulesoft through the RTF cluster and retrieve that image. That is the job of our init script. And then we also get all the resources that we need. We make sure that the registry credentials are up to date. And then once you get the image, we kind of add the runtime in the pod. The next step is adding the sidecar, right? So every application that you deploy in Runtime Fabric is going to have a sidecar, which is Anypoint monitoring. So Anypoint monitoring sidecar is also retrieved from the image repo credentials, retrieved and then run alongside with the pod that you have created. Once everything is set and ready, then you get a notification back to your RTF cluster, back to your agent, back to your control plane that the deployment is set and ready. So that's how the application deployment works. So the two major steps that I explained, you need to upload the application package to Exchange, and then you need to deploy it from Exchange. So that's the new change that we have introduced with Runtime Fabric. Key components, again, the communication between your runtime plane and between your agent and the control plane needs to be established and working for this to work. The registry credit job needs to be refreshed. The init container should be up to date. So all these are kind of taken care automatically when you install RTF services on your infrastructure. So it should not be a problem every time. These are the two steps that you need to make sure that work fine. Finally, yeah, so this was kind of an overview of the different RTF deployment models, all the deployments models we have. Feel free to post your questions in the chat. I've not had a chance to look at it. We'll try to take some questions before the demo and after the demo as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Jimmy, who's going to talk about our trivia questions. All the questions, answers to those were covered in the session that we just talked about. Hopefully you are able to answer those.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Sandeep. Now it's the fun time. Let's go to the next slide. So those are the rules that we want to follow when we answering the trivia questions. So please make sure that you only provide one answer on the chat after I read the questions, and then I type "go now" in the chat box. The reason you want to wait until I type "go now" in the chat, because right before after the "go now" I will pick up the first one with the right answer. So please, one answer, and then wait until I type "go now" in the chat box. And then you don't have to put the full answer, just type A, B, or C, or D. Okay? Hope this is clear. Let's move ahead with the first question. All right. Identify all the components which are managed by Mulesoft for Runtime Fabric deployment model. A, Anypoint Platform Management Plane, Anypoint Platform Management Plane, Mule Runtime and RTF Appliances / RTF Services. C, Anypoint Platform Management Plane and RTF Appliances / RTF Services. Or D, RTF Appliance / RTF Services. Okay. 1 second. We'll give it a minute. Perfect. Let's move to the next one. Can we go to the next one, Sandeep, please? All right. Which are the operating systems supported by Runtime Fabric appliance model? RHEL, CentOS OS, RHEL, CentOS OS, Windows, or both A and B? Go now. Perfect. Let's move to the next one. Question 3, last one. Which of the following deployment models can leverage the Anypoint security product for securing network traffic coming into Mule applications? A, Cloud Hub, B, Cloud Hub and Runtime Fabric, C, Runtime Fabric Appliance, D, Runtime Fabric Appliance and Runtime Fabric self-managed Kubernetes. Perfect. Thank you all. We will announce the winners at the end, towards the end. Now I'll bounce the ball to Mandy to go over some of the questions that we captured throughout the chat. Go ahead, Mandy.
Thank you, Jimmy. So we got a lot of good questions as Sandeep was going over his portion of the presentation, and I have selected a few to be presented before the demo. So the first question is from Partha, who asks, can we run Mulesoft standalone or RTF on OpenShift platform?
The support is not there currently. We don't support OpenShift right now. That is something that we are looking at. OpenShift, we understand, is a platform that a lot of customers use, and it's a popular one in the market. So we are looking into it, but right now we don't support OpenShift for runtime fabric or standard.
Yeah. So the good news is, of course, with the safe harbor statement, it's been worked on currently, and it's planned to be released in FY 2022, which is this year. We are hoping that we will have the release date soon. So just hold on. But yeah, we are working on getting support added.
Okay, thank you guys. The second question is from Sudhir, who asks, will there be any latency or performance impact if we are running RTF on Azure and connecting to control plane with Anypoint monitoring agent?
No, Anypoint monitoring agents runs in the backend. You can think of it as an asynchronous process. It does require a resource, and which gets allocated, right? It will require the CPU and memory for the agent to work and to pass data, but that doesn't have any impact on the application, which runs in a different container. And yeah, there will be no performance impact as such.
Yeah, like Amit mentioned, it's a sidecar. It has its own dedicated CPU and memory, which is uses to monitor and get the stats.
Okay, thank you guys. Next question is from Sandeep, who asks, so RTF does not support binary repos like Nexus or Artifactory. What is the type of artifact when publishing to Exchange? And what is classifier in the POM file used for?
The classifier is mule application, and the file type is jar. So RTF cannot get those files when we do deployment from the customer's own repository, right? For various reasons, because you do have control plane sitting in a public cloud managed by Mulesoft, so you cannot have access to all the customer repositories from there, and that was the reason we chose Anypoint Exchange as the repository where the application will be stored. So to answer your question, short, is jar file same as when you deploy any applications with Mule 4? All the Mule 3 will be zip file, by the way. So if you're still using Mule 3, so Mule 4 will be jar file, and it will be stored as a Mule application within Exchange.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Martin, who asks, is it possible to secure Mule source code on a client's infrastructure to ensure it cannot be used outside of a contractual agreement?
So the option would be using the PCE model, where we kind of supply the control plane as well as the runtime to the customers. The disadvantage to that is we have some features that are not supported in that model. It will be compliant, but again, you're running like a few versions behind when you compare it with Cloud Hub model.
Okay. Thank you. And the last question is from Ramesh, who asks, why are there 3 controller nodes in prod? Is there a specific reason?
You want to take it, Amit?
Yeah, so it's actually a Kubernetes concept. So it's called Kubernetes quorum. So to maintain the quorum, you need those nodes in odd numbers. And to have an HA, the odd number should be more than 2, right? So although 1 is an odd number, you can't create a quorum with 1. It's a lot of discussion over that, but just to be keeping it short, if you are having HA and you are having 2 nodes and you're moving traffic to both, if one of the node goes down, and to have trying to support HA, you have to have multiple replicas, then all running in the same node, and that can bring the node down. So having 3 controller nodes, or even worker nodes, has to be 3 or in odd numbers. So having 3 means that even if you have 2 replicas and one of the nodes goes down, that application can be move to the available to worker or controller nodes available. So it's all Kubernetes quorum concept. And since we are using Kubernetes behind the scene, we have that requirement in place for production. Although in non-production, you can go with one controller and two worker nodes.
Yeah, and just to add to that, minimum is 3 for production and maximum we support is 5. So if you're running, if you need to add controller nodes, maximum could be 5.
Okay. Thank you for those very thorough and detailed answers, Amit and Sandeep. So now we're getting to the part where you've all been waiting for, and it's the RTF hands-on demo. So this is the most exciting part of the presentation, and I hope you all enjoy.
Sorry for interruption, Mandy. I think that we have captured more questions. Maybe we can still address the rest towards the end of the session after the demo.
Yes.
Works.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm going to stop presenting. Amit, go ahead and present.
Okay. Let me start sharing my screen. Okay, so hopefully my screen is visible, right?
Yes.
So what we are going to do today is we are going to look at an application that exists in Cloud Hub, and we'll be trying to migrate that applications to Runtime Fabric. And what we'll try to also do is we would migrate it to both Runtime Fabric on appliance and Runtime Fabric on a self-managed Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so before we even go into Runtime Fabric, there's something that you should be aware about. To be able to create Runtime Fabric or even manage Runtime Fabric, there is a specific permission that that a user requires. So I'm just going to my user ID, and if you go to Runtime Manager, you will see there's something called Manage Runtime Fabric. So if you are somebody who is managing Runtime Fabric for your for a customer or even for your company, then make sure that you get adequate permission within the access management. Sometimes we do get complaints that we are not able to see Runtime Fabric, we're not able to create Runtime Fabric. Most of the times, the reason is because you don't have the right permission. So once we have figured that out, let's see how we can create a Runtime Fabric in our environment. So for that, we need to go into Runtime Manager. And once you have that option, and by default, right now, everybody gets that entitlement. So you will get to see Runtime Fabric in your environment where you are in. Just FYI, I think the trial versions or when you create a trial account, I don't think you will have access to Runtime Fabric. So these are limited to customers with that already have a license with them. Right? I did see a question that licenses, are there any difference? Actually, it's not. So Runtime Fabric, Standalone, and Cloud Hub, you pay the same license for all three of them. And a customer can switch license between these three deployment models. So if you're looking at Runtime Fabric, you just click on this button, and then you will see an option. So you can either do it on EKS, AKS, or VMs or bare metal. So if we are choosing this option, then you can deploy it either on your Azure infrastructure, AWS infrastructure, or your own data centers. So, and even like Mandy mentioned, GCP is covered currently under your bare metal infrastructure. So you have to use the same kind of script that you use for your own data center. Although we are looking at bringing out the support for GCP platform soon. So you just give it a name, and that's it. You will get some script, and using that, you can deploy it, right? For the current meetup, we're not going to show that. I think this was covered previously, or you can go through the documentation. Once you have created your Runtime Fabric, coming to this page, you can see the details of your clusters. So my Runtime Fabric name is Demo Fabric. is running on version 1.8.23, and this is the appliance version, right? So this is RTF appliance that is created. So this is the cores that I have, and this is the memory. So this is the amount of RAM I have available, and the distribution type is appliance. If there are any updates available to the version, to either the appliance version or the agent version, it would be shown here, and there will be a link and with the documentation then how you can upgrade. Health details talks about all the agents that are running and what's their status. So this gets updated every 5 minutes, and if for some reason any of the agents are unhealthy, this UI will show you that. And also there's an option of enabling mutual authentication. So that if you enable this option, then the control plane or endpoint platform will interact with your agents over mutual authentication. And like you see, a minimum of 3 nodes is required. So in my case, I'm using it as my development environment. So I do have only 2 nodes. So this does show that if the configuration is applicable for a production environment or not. So those options are available here. Then coming to associated environment. So this is required because you have to set up your cluster within a specific environment. So this allows you to deploy an application with all the environments that you choose here into Runtime Fabric. So if this option is not enabled, that means that if I have to deploy something in production, I won't be able to use this Runtime Fabric. It will not show it, and we'll see it momentarily how the dropdown looks like when we are trying to deploy an application. And also, you can add additional business groups. So this can spawn over multiple business groups if you have it in your organization. So you can add a single Runtime Fabric clusters to multiple business groups and various different environments, provided you have a hierarchical structure between your business groups. So a Runtime Fabric cluster can be shared across direct hierarchical structure. So a parent and a child can share a business group, but siblings cannot. So if you have 2 business groups at the same level and you have Runtime Fabric attached to one of them, the second one will not be able to inherit it. So that's something that you should keep in mind when you're creating a new cluster. Now let's look at inbound traffic. So since this is an appliance, the ingress is managed by Mulesoft. So we do provide the ingress along with the package. So to be able to cater to any traffic coming into the ingress, this has to be enabled. Then the status talks about if we have already applied the ingress, then you can allocate cores for your ingress, right? Ingress will require some kind of memory and the cores to run itself. So you can choose that. This actually ingress runs in a controller nodes. So the option that you're seeing it here, the maximum, the minimum, that is because of how much my controller nodes can support. And then there's a protocol. So you can choose both HTTP and HTTPS, or you can either choose HTTP request only. So these are the options available during the protocol. Then you have to define a domain. So you have to attach a certificate to your ingress. This certificate can either be added directly from the server or the machine that you're on, or this can be imported from Secret Manager. We'll not go into details of Secret Manager, but those are the options available. You can either upload a JKS or a PEM file as a certificate. And make sure that, although looking at this expiry, don't do that. Whatever I have normally keeps a certificate that will expire in 3 months, 6 months, whatever your company policy is. Don't keep a certificate like mine, which expires in 2009. So don't give a certificate that keeps too long. Security policies. So this is something that Sandeep talked about, endpoint security or edge security. So this option is available with appliance, and you can set up some kind of WAF, IP whitelisting, or denial of service. So you can create those kind of policies and you can attach it here. Then there's an advanced option where you can configure like how many maximum connections, how many requests can come per connection, if there is a connection idle timeout. These values are configurable, so you can change those values as per your needs. In some cases, one of the values that I've frequently seen changing with the customer is read timeout, right? So when you're reading a request and you have a large amount of data passing through your API, 10 seconds may be too less, right? So in one of the cases with a customer, we had about half a GB of data that was passing through our REST API. Don't ask me why, but the customer did have something that required that amount of data. So to cater to that, we had to increase this because without it, the ingress will just time out before even the whole data is passed through to the application. Then there's a log option. So we have trace, debug, verbose, info. So normally we keep it at info. However, if you are facing challenges with your ingress and you want to debug, then you can change that to debug or trace option. So this can be changed by the customer as well, and this will change the logging level for your ingress. Next comes log forwarding. So log can be forwarded provided you have a Titanium subscription. Normally, all the metrics for your applications will be passed on to an endpoint monitoring plane, and that can be seen through endpoint monitoring UI. However, if you have Titanium, the logs that are generated by your application, that also gets transferred to an endpoint monitoring server, and you can see it through the UI. Right? So this does require access to a specific port, which is a Lumberjack port 5044. So customer does have to enable that. We do provide a script when you're deploying a runtime fabric to make sure that all the ports that runtime fabric requires and all the access to right hosts are there, because we will be downloading images and control plane will require to manage your runtime fabric cluster. So that's a prerequisite when you are installing runtime fabric, to make sure that all required accesses for hostname and ports are in place. However, you do have an option to now send your application logs to an external service of your choice as well. These are the supported ones. So you can either send it to Azure, Elasticsearch, Gulf, Splunk, CloudWatch, and Syslog.
Hey, Amit.
So if you have a Syslog, yeah.
Amit, sorry to interrupt you. Can you zoom your browser a little bit? It's too
sure.
For everyone to read. Oh, 60. Okay. Yeah. This is much better. Thanks.
Okay, so moving into runtime fabric self-managed Kubernetes. So what I have here is something that I created with an EKS cluster. So same details here. You see the version, you see the Kubernetes version it is using, right? And the distribution. The health check is also present, although you will see here it has much less information than what we had with appliance, because there are a lot many components running in the appliance. And the same manner that we do the appliance, we have to associate the environments, and that allows you to deploy applications into those environments. Inbound traffic. So there is no ingress. Like Sandeep talked about, the ingress has to be something that customer brings on their own. However, to be able to have a URL for somebody to be able to call the applications, you do need an endpoint. So whatever certificate you're using with your load balancer or with your ingress, you can mention those domains here. And it does support both fully qualified domain, or you can go with a wild card characters as well. So in my case, I'm just using fully qualified domain with the certificate that I have with my ingress. Log forwarding, you see an option to send data. If you have a Titanium feature, if you have a Titanium subscription, then you can send your application data to endpoint monitoring. However, you will see the second option is missing. So log forwarding to their own systems like Splunk or CloudWatch becomes customer responsibility, and we don't provide an agent on self-managed Kubernetes. So that's a big differentiator. So customer can bring their own application where they want to forward the log, but then again, you have to set it up by yourself. There is no agent provided by Mulesoft. Okay, so we looked at the various configurations available for Runtime Fabric. Now let's dive into an application that we have on Cloud Hub, and let's try to migrate that into Runtime Fabric. So the application that I'm going to use today for migration purposes is, people familiar with Mulesoft training module will recognize these applications, right? So this is American Web Service. So let's download this application from Cloud Hub and try to migrate it into Runtime Fabric, right? So I'll just download this application, and now let me import that application into my studio. So while it imports the application, let's try to expand it and open it. For the purposes of meetup, we have just chosen a simple application, so that it doesn't take much time. But we'll go through a few concepts. So looking at the looking at applications, you can see it's listening on 8082 port, and it was on Cloud Hub. So it uses HTTPS protocol for interaction, and it has its own TLS certificate as well. Now, when we are trying to put this application in Runtime Fabric, one thing that we need to keep in mind is in Runtime Fabric, it listens to a single port, right? Any applications that you put for HTTP, it just listens to one single port. So if people are familiar with Cloud Hub will understand that there are 4 different ports that are applicable for Cloud Hub. So one of them being 8081, which is for HTTP transport, then 8082, which is used for HTTPS, then 8091, which is used for HTTP private, so which can be accessed by only TLB, and then 8092. So those are again the private ports that can be accessed only from within the network, right? However, in Runtime Fabric, we use 8081 for both HTTP and HTTPS communication. How does that work? We'll see it later. So what we need to do to migrate to Runtime Fabric is we have to change the port, save the application. I'm sorry, this even would be probably zoomed in. So sorry about the small font. I'm so used to that. But let me export it and try to migrate that to Runtime Fabric. So there we are putting it. So we are putting it in our meetup folder. Okay, so once the application is exported, let's now go back to our Runtime Manager. And let's try to deploy this application into Runtime Fabric. So once you click on deploying the application, you will see the targets, right? So since the dev environment was linked, Cloud Hub is by default an option. But since dev environment is linked with both Demo Fabric, which is an appliance, and Demo RTF EKS, which is an EKS self-managed Kubernetes version, I get both the options. So we'll try to deploy it to the appliance first. Now, let's see what are the options available to me. Runtime version. So this we can choose anything from the drop down. So the minimum version that we support is 3.8.7, and then from that onwards to the latest version 4.3.0. So whenever you choose this, is by default takes the latest patch for this version, which is available. Replicas, you can choose one minimum and more than one for getting HA. So you can choose up to 8 replicas for each application, right? So that's kind of a constraint. You cannot have more than 8 replicas. So in our case, we are just going with one. But if you want to get HA, then you can choose more than one. And if you choose more than one, you will get this option. You can also run this application in cluster mode. So people familiar with standalone will understand what cluster mode does. So it uses caching behind the scene to synchronize your application when you are using a cluster mode. Right? So we're going for one replica, so we'll not need that option. There's also an option of enforcing your deployment across nodes. We talked about production having minimum of 3 worker and 3 controller nodes. So if you want to make sure that the application replica does not, like if you choose 2 replicas and it installs both your pods into the same worker node, and if for some reason the worker node goes down and you have to create those replicas into another worker node, that do mean that you may have some kind of trouble accessing those APIs. So there's an option to check this box. That means that new replicas would be put into unique worker nodes. This comes with a disclaimer that this is best case scenario. It will try to do it, but it does not guarantee that applications will be deployed, because it may happen that one of the worker node is at full capacity and it's not possible to put into those worker nodes. So, but the agent will try its best to do that. Then there's rolling update and recreate. So rolling update is kind of the same concept that we have in Cloud Hub. So whenever you're deploying an application into RTF, it creates the new pod for that application, and it switches the traffic once that pod is ready to get the traffic, and then only it deletes the old pod. The advantage of this is that for any reason you are putting bad code or your code is not getting deployed to runtime fabric, you still have your old code running in the pod. So unless the new pod is healthy and is ready to get new traffic, it will not switch. So that's an advantage. However, if you choose recreate, that means whenever you're trying to deploy, it will destroy the old pod and it will recreate a new one. Although normally customers don't go for recreate option. However, to support rolling update, you do have to keep in mind that it requires those resources to be available. So what does that mean? So if you are, say, using one core, right, per application, and you're deploying a new version of that application, so it will require minimum of 2 cores available in the worker node to be able to do rolling update. If that resource is not available, this deployment would fail with an error that you don't have enough resources available. Reserve CPU and CPU limit. So these are again coming from Kubernetes concept. So for any pod that you create, you can choose how much resources will be dedicated to that particular pod. So minimum for RTF is 0.02. You cannot go below this. So this is something that you have to choose. And whatever you choose here, the pod will have those resources always available to itself. CPU limit is something that is shared between pods. So say, for example, you have a worker node where 2 different applications are running, and both of them have one reserved CPU, right? So if it's a 4-core machine, so they are already reserved 2 CPUs. If you have 2 applications, the 2 CPU is available to be shared between these applications. So if you put CPU limit as 3, they can, both applications can go to use 3 cores each, provided those are available from the worker perspective. And this is one of the reasons why we suggest a customer that whenever you're creating an RTF cluster, do create it bigger than whatever license you may have. So although if a customer have an 8-core license, that does not mean that you can only do 4 VMs with 2 core each, right? You can go more than that because your applications may need to go up or down based on how much traffic is coming to the application. So we do recommend a larger cluster infrastructure than whatever license you may have.
Hi,
Let's look into
Amit. So there's a question from Sandeep in the chat. If show how this is done with Maven, and if that's not going to take too long, would it be possible for you to show, or would that be a while?
Right. Yeah, so we do have a Maven plugin that allows you to do RTF deployment, although during the meetup we'll not be able to cover that. We'll be deploying through the UI, but yeah, the Maven plugin is available that does support RTF deployment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's look at the ingress. So this domain that we have is because of the certificate that we had used in our runtime fabric. So from there, it will use the domain. If you do have multiple SANs under the certificate that you have put in there, then it will show up multiple domains and you can choose one of them here. So we do have support for multiple SANs right now. Enable last mile security and forward SSL session. So last mile security is all about HTTP and HTTPS. So when you deploy an application, I mentioned that RTF only listens on 8081 port, but how does it distinguish that it's listening on a secure network or an unsecure network? So this checkbox takes care of that. So in our case, since we would be deploying an application that listens on HTTPS, we need to enable last mile security. So if this is not enabled, Ingress thinks your application is running on HTTP and it will use that protocol to interact with your application. This is one of the common mistakes normally developers do when they are deploying an application. So they use HTTPS as their listener. However, they forget to check this box, and that can create issues. Forward SSL session. So any certificate that comes in, if you want to forward it to the application, then you can use this checkbox to forward SSL session to your application. Now, the properties. If you want to override or you want to give your environment properties, right? So if you're deploying it to dev environment and then there is a global property that you want to define, those can come in here. And it does provide you both the text and table view, right? So you can either do like key value, or you can go to a text view and you can choose. So in our case, we are going to define 2 different properties. And we'll see why we're defining these properties later. So these are 2 different properties we are using. People familiar with API Manager will understand why the client ID and client secret is required to associate this with the API ID. But this can be any properties. And you can toggle between the 2. So JVM, so there are a few properties that you can override, although all the JVM properties cannot be overwritten. Folks familiar with standalone will know that they can change wrapper.conf to play around with different JVM properties. In case of RTF, it is limited. There are a few properties that you can change. There are other properties that you cannot change. But changing wrapper.conf directly is not, it cannot be done in case of runtime fabric. It's the same concept as CloudHub. CloudHub also does not allow you to change wrapper.conf directly. However, even in CloudHub, you can change some JVM properties. Same can be done in runtime fabric as well. And then there's a logs, right? So you can forward it to Titanium. And if I had that other option enabled, I would have played around with the external services as well, right? So let's do a deployment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this application same as Cloud Hub, but I am just replaced Cloud Hub by RTFA. So this is for RTF appliance, and let's trigger the deployment. While we are doing the deployment, Sandeep did talked about the role of Exchange, right? So we do use Exchange as a repository. So behind the scene, when you're deploying it, the UI, the runtime manager, takes care of first putting the artifact into Exchange and putting that dependency into the deployment call to runtime fabric. So that's all taken care when you're doing it UI behind the scene. However, since the question of Maven came in, when you're doing it through Maven, it's actually a two-step process. First, you have to use those Maven commands to put the artifact into Exchange, and then you can use the Maven plugin for RTF, or it's the same Maven plugin, but with the RTF option. RTF is a deployment option available for the Maven plugin. So that you can use for deployment through the Maven. Right. So let's look at this application that we have deployed into Cloud Hub once. And going through the properties, you can see my client secret is masked. Right. So that's one of the options that is available in Cloud Hub, that if you want to mask your properties, you can go into muleartifact.json and you can select that as a secure property. Since I put this value as secure properties, it's not visible to the users. However, when you come, and do keep in mind the auto scaling and all those things, this option may not be available to everyone. So I do have some privileges as a Mulesoft employee to get some accesses. So when you're seeing auto scaling and you look at your own Cloud Hub and this is not available, please don't complain. Okay, and I'm going to deploy the same application into appliance, right? But when you look at the properties, although I had that option available, the same code got deployed into runtime fabric, you can still see this value. Reason for that is currently the secure properties masking is not available in case of runtime fabric. Okay, so let's now first check that if our application was working in Cloud Hub, right? So how do we do that? This application is listening on a path called flights. So let's see if this application is available. And it's listening on 8082 with HTTPS protocol, right? So we have to mention that. So this is the response that we are getting. People familiar with the application will know we are calling a database behind the scenes. So we do have a database connector, and that fetches the data. So a table, right? So this is a MySQL table from where we are fetching the data, and then we are converting that to a JSON format and showing it to the user. Right? So this is what the application is doing. And here we can see that application is sending a response back in case of Cloud Hub. Now, let's try to call that application on RTF. So, benefit of everyone, let me see if I can increase it. Okay, so this is not visible. Let's try to hit our application on RTF appliance. So I already have my curl command saved, and let's go into details of the curl command, right? So we are calling HTTPS, but we have one-way SSL, so that's why we are using my minus K, and then we are having verbose to get more details about this. This is the URL that we got here, right? So once, if we go back to our console and check the application, you will see this was a application URL that was created. So we're going to use the same URL here, and then this is the path where the application is listening. Now, why do we need resolve? So in my case, I have a self-signed certificate. So this domain that got created, I don't have a DNS lookup for that, right? So either I can do two things. So either I can use this value in my host file, and I can map this value with the controller node, and that has to be public IP, right? If you are using your customer network, you can do your private IP, but since I have in AWS, I'm using a public IP. So either I can map this to my controller IP address, or else I can pass in the resolve parameter, saying that when you are looking at this domain with this port, that resolves to this particular IP, right? So let's see. Okay, so we got a response back. And it's the same response that we are getting through the browser here. Right? Plain type 0.77 and code 2. So we are getting the same response for the applications that we deployed into Runtime Fabric. Now, let's see if we can look at the logs for our application in Runtime Fabric. So Sandeep talked about Ops Center, and that's something which is available only for appliance users. So this comes bundled with it. So if I have to look at the logs for my applications, I have to go into Kubernetes, go to pods, choose my environment, and then this is the application which is running. So if I have to look at the logs, then for it, click here and choose logs. It will take some time to come up. In the meantime, let's look at the code, right? So we do have a logger in here, which is logging the payload. So we expect to see the same payload that users are seeing in the console, right? So while it's just filtering the logs, let's just give it a few minutes. But while it's doing that, let's talk a bit about console, right? Oh, okay. So log came back. So as you can see, the log is being shown in the console. However, you see the challenge with this, right? So when you're seeing the log, it's just a small window where the logs will come up. So it's highly recommended for the customers that if you want some kind of visibility on your logs for your developers, right? Ops Center access is for admins, so it may not get the access may not be available for all your developers. So either you have a Titanium subscription where all the logs will go into endpoint monitoring, and we'll go into that in a bit in some time to look at those logs there, or else you have a log forwarding solution, and that's where the log forwarder comes in handy. So we saw different options available. So you use one of those options, and then you can look at your logs from your system of choice, and you can forward it there. With this, I will just cover a few things. You can monitor the status of your cluster, of your nodes, of your applications from here. So this provides you kind of a dashboard. You can also log into each of your controller or worker nodes from the Ops Center. So Ops Center has a lot of features for the operation folks, whoever has to manage the appliance. But we'll not go into much details on it because it's an extensive topic by itself. It also shows the health of your cluster as well, right? So that's about migrating the application from Cloud Hub to Runtime Fabric, right? We saw the changes that we needed to do. In our case, the application was simple, so the port change was the only thing that was required. However, there may be some other considerations that you may also have to do. At the end of the session, we will be sharing some links where we have discussed about various considerations that you normally will have to do when you are migrating applications between various models. Let's now move on to migrating the same application to our EKS cluster. Okay. Now we already have the application here. Now, right now, the way my EKS cluster is configured, my EKS cluster can only listen to HTTP port. It cannot listen to HTTPS. My ingress has not been set up to to support that, right? So I need to now make changes to my application so that I can run it on HTTP. So I change my protocol. I leave my port at 8081 because I don't need to change that. And I remove my TLS context, okay, for my application. And I save it. Now let's export this to work with our EKS version. Okay, so we have exported. Let's go back to our runtime manager and let's deploy the application again and see what are the options available. So deployment model will be EKS this time. Runtime fabric, same. You choose the version, you choose the replica, right? You can still enforce replicas across nodes. You can still use cluster mode, right? So all those are the same. So the first page will have the same options that you had from appliance. However, ingress changes. No SSL forwarding. No checkbox to say your application is using HTTP or HTTPS. Those details will now have to be configured into customer's own ingress. So you have to modify your ingress resource so that you recognize the HTTP or HTTPS and do the right kind of redirection, because the ingress is now managed by yourself, right? Either the customer or by your company operations, right? Properties. So same thing. Let me copy the same properties again. However, you would have understood by now that we don't support masking in this case, but it's basically the same concept. You can override the properties as well through this. JVM and logs are the same concept. However, you will not see an option for forwarding to external services. So log forwarding to your own external services is not supported with Runtime Fabric on self-managed Kubernetes. Okay, let's choose our file. So we have changed the file and let's give it a name. Okay, and let's deploy the application. Oh, okay, just one thing. You can support multiple domains here, and it can be fully qualified domain name, or you can use wildcards as well. In my case, I'm using a fully qualified domain name, but you can use both. And once you have configured that at your RTF cluster level, then that option will be available in the drop-down here. Okay, so let the application get deployed. In the meantime, let me bring something up. And let me make it bigger for you. Few things I can make bigger, few things I cannot. So what we'll try to do is, I've already linked my command, my terminal with my EKS, right? I'm using my Mac laptop to control my EKS. I did see a question where somebody asked that, can we do RTF on your own Kubernetes? Sorry, the support is not there. We can only do it on EKS and AKS at this point. So probably support will come in future, but right now you cannot install RTF on self-managed Kubernetes on your own Kubernetes. Okay, so I ran the command to see what are the pods which are running. So this was the application that I was trying to deploy. So you can see this application says running. However, I would wait for the browser to be updated with the status, right? So it says here running. And if you follow the sequence that Sandeep showed, there are a few things that happens behind the scene before it comes to running status. So you should always wait for this to be in a running status. So these are the pods that I have I'm using here, right? This is the application pod. So now we have to figure out where is our application listening on, right? What is the host name for our application? So for that, what we will do is, for each application that we deploy, we can do it runs with its own ingress, right? So this was a ingress that was created for this application. And you can see this is the address on which my application is listening on. And you can see port 80, right? So we are doing HTTP. That's why you will not see 443. So both the options are not enabled for my ingress. For whoever who is curious, I'm using Nginx by Kubernetes as my ingress. So let me put this into a curl command and try to see if we can retrieve. We can call our applications on EKS. Okay, so we'll use this terminal that we had used earlier, and I've already created my curl command. So as you can see, the host name that you saw with my load balancer is the address I am hitting, and I am passing in the host. Again, like previously, I mentioned that in case of appliance, I was using my self-signed certificate. In the same way, I'm using a self-signed certificate here. And in case of appliance, you saw I was using wildcard. In this case, I'm using a fully qualified domain name, right? So in appliance, I had to put, when I put the resolve command, I had to put the application name dot the domain that I was using, right? In this case, it's a fully qualified domain name. So I am just putting the domain name, and the ingress would be distributing traffic or proxying the traffic based on the path and the address, right? So let us run this curl command and see. Okay, so we got the same response back. So same application, we have now deployed into RTF on EKS, which is listening on HTTP port. So we have made changes for that, and we are getting the same response back from our application in here. Since we have a few more minutes, I will try to cover monitoring. And we talked about log forwarding, right? So let's go into monitor, and I will just try to show the log forwarding. So you will see all the applications. So for this to happen, to be able to see all the RTF application here, you need Titanium subscription. So only after you have a Titanium subscription, you will see this option. For other customers who don't have Titanium subscription, it will show you only the API option, not the RTF app or Cloud Hub app option for looking at the log files, right? So let's try to find our application in here and see if we can look at the logs for that application. So this is our appliance, and this is our EKS. So let's look at appliance first. So click on view, and then click on. So this gives you all the stats, right? What's the health of your application, how much CPU you are using, what kind of response time, what's the JVM heap memory, what has been used. So all those things are here in this dashboard. However, when you click on view logs, you can see the log. You can do a search, right? There are various filters that you can put. You can also change the time. You can do auto refresh. You can look for last 60, 90 days of log. You can choose a specific time. There are all those options are there, and then you can use wildcard characters here. You can also download these logs later, but this is how the logs will look like for your developers if you have Titanium subscription. So that was appliance. Let's look at our self-managed Kubernetes as well. So we see the same log. Okay, so that concludes the demo for today. What we looked at today was, oh, I do have one more thing that I wanted to show you. what happens to those customers who don't have access to Titanium, right? Where you want to see logs in your own infrastructure or your own services. When you looked at the terminal, you would have seen I had the CloudWatch and Fluentd agent running, right? So that we're passing in my applications log onto CloudWatch. So now we will be going to CloudWatch and seeing the logs from there. So go to the container insights, go to resources. And we'll be trying to find out our applications. This was the dev environment where we have it. And this is the application for which we are looking at our logs. Oh, let's make sure the pod name matches, right? So what we are running is N977K. So N977. Oh, sorry, I looked at the wrong one. MTF8. So MTF8. So this is the application for which we are looking at the log file. So click on View Application Log. This will automatically create your query. And you can just run your query to fetch the log file. Okay. And this is our application log. Let me see if I can make it up. Okay. So this is the same log that we saw on the anyone monitoring. So the same logs have been passed on to CloudWatch as well, and you can go into CloudWatch and look at your application logs as well. Okay. So that concludes the demo for today. I would hand it over back to Mandy.
So thank you for that awesome and insightful demo. I definitely answered all of my questions, if not more. And there are actually some very interesting questions from the audience I want to bring up.
Right.
The first one is, do RTF runtimes use the latest version of JDK and OpenJDK as well?
No, we support 1.8 and 1.11.
Okay.
Those are those two supported versions for OpenJDK.
Does the ops console come with the AKS/EKS?
No. Sorry, those are short answers, but those are not available. So I don't have an alternative. I don't have a kind of a way out, right? If you can manage it in a different manner. The reason is we call it self-managed Kubernetes for that reason. Ops Center is for managing RTF appliance. And it comes with a specific flavor. So RTF appliances uses gravitational flavor of Kubernetes. So Ops Center is pre-packaged with that gravitational flavor, the whole package thing. So Ops Center comes with that. Obviously, EKS and AKS, since it doesn't have an appliance, that option of Ops Center is not available. Neither you can put it in there. You have to use something like CloudWatch, like I showed, for managing, but it has the same kind of features. Customers have been asking for CloudWatch for managing the appliance cluster. That was one of the reasons that we looked at having self-managed Kubernetes, right? Because customers sometimes want to manage on their own rather than use Ops Center for managing this. So that's the reason. It's actually no.
Okay, thank you for the elaboration. Next question is clustering supported in EKS and AKS RTF?
Yeah, it's by default, right? The whole clustering is done by EKS or AKS. So those are the services that manages your cluster. So you have to create a node group, and inside a node group, you will have those VMs where your services will run. You can compare that with worker nodes, right? So the worker nodes are those node groups. However, the controller nodes are not present. Controller nodes are your EKS and AKS services that manage those node groups.
Yeah, makes sense. A question from Sandeep. Is resource allocation for the JVM on worker?
You can play around with a bit. That being said, by default, what happens is whenever you deploy an application, it allocates 50% of your memory for the JVM automatically, and 50% is left behind for the application. So there is an algorithm behind the scene on how memory distribution happens. You can manage to a certain extent, but will not recommend because that may create problem later for your application to run.
That's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And a question from Sudhir. Can we download log files using FileBeat for ELK for RTF?
I think you can. If you are on ELK, sorry, you meant EKS for RTF, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it?
Can you say that question again? Probably I'm confused. ELK, I do understand if you are looking at from. Okay, so if you're looking at from appliance perspective, you can download the files. I did show it to you, right? So you can look at the file and then you can download the raw data as well. If you want, okay, you can go into runtime. You can go into endpoint monitoring, and there is an option of raw data, and from there you can download the log files. So this is an option available only for Titanium subscription customers and only for appliance. In case of EKS or AKS, you are sending the files to CloudWatch, right, or an equivalent service like Splunk. Wherever you're sending it, you have to rely upon those services to download the file. But if you are talking about appliance and you're talking about a Titanium subscription, you can download the file. That option is there.
And Amit, another option is they could set up a RSS log server and then send.
Yeah. So if you set up your own agent where the logs are getting forwarded to, obviously you can download it from there. So that option is there for you.
Yep.
Question from Sudhir again. We have T2 instances in Cloud Hub for 0.1 vCore to handle burst traffic. How is burst traffic handled in RTF?
Okay. This actually comes under scaling, right? So if you are looking at your burst traffic for the application, right? So there are two kinds of bursting that is applicable in this case. One kind of bursting is for your application where we define what's the minimum resources your application will take and how much it can burst to. And that we mentioned during the deployment. And based on that, the Kubernetes will manage allocation of resources. So if your application requires more resources, Kubernetes will give it to your application. So that's one part of it, how CPU bursting works in RTF.
So in Cloud Hub, 0.1 workers are burstable instances, like you mentioned. The way you can achieve it in RTF is setting the CPU limits. So if you have a time where you are expecting high traffic volumes, then you could set a CPU limit for that particular pod, which can burst up to a certain limit. Again, it's going to be limited to how much CPU you have available on that worker node, but you can definitely burst for a short, like till you have set the limits for the CPU.
Yeah, to add what Sandeep said is those burstings are managed by Kubernetes behind us here, and Cloud Hub is managed by Mulesoft, right? So that's the difference. And you have a better handle on this bursting because you already know how much resources you have allocated. In Cloud Hub, you don't, right? There's an algorithm behind the scene that uses the credit that you have in Cloud Hub to control the bursting, which is different in how RTF works.
Thank you. The next question from Sandeep is, how can we hide the secret or keep it encrypted?
Yeah. So there's a different concept. What's called Sandeep is secure
RTF,
configuration.
It's a RTF CTL utility which kind of uses Kubernetes secrets manager in the backend to store your secrets per environment. So you could add all your secrets in Kubernetes secrets manager using that utility, and it will be persisted even if you destroy the pods.
So it's called Secure Manager, probably, if I'm not wrong.
Secure
So RTF Secure Manager. Secure Manager, but yeah, it's supported by RTF CTL.
Yep, I've shared the link in the chat. So,
Okay. Next question from Priyanka is, in RTF, can the scheduler frequencies be managed for a meal app from any point platform?
No. And you know why I'm laughing? No, not possible. No. It's a Cloud feature, not possible in RTF.
Okay. Another question from Sandeep is, so we have to change our binary distribution management for RTF now that we no longer use Artifactory. Is that correct?
Right. You can store the same code in Artifactory, but RTF will only deploy it from Anypoint Exchange. RTF cannot use Artifactory for deploying those applications. So that's a dependency. There's no way around it. But with Anypoint Exchange, you also want to store it in your Artifactory? You can. You can just not deploy it directly from Artifactory. You have to put it into Exchange first, and from there you can deploy into RTF.
Okay. And as Sandeep mentioned, Exchange has a soft limit of 100,000 assets for an organization.
Yeah, it has. To reach that limit, it will take some time. If your organization is something which is reaching that limit, do reach out to our support to customer success. We'll see what we can do, probably increasing the limit. But yeah, if you can reach that limit, do reach out to us. We'll see what we can do about it. But you got to aware about that restriction.
Sounds good. Question from Sudhir is, are there any constraints in storage if we store artifacts in Exchange? And I think that was answered.
Yeah, I answered those questions, Mandy.
Okay. And last question from Sandeep is, how is the new line character removed from the payload, which is appearing in the logs?
Okay, this probably going to take offline. I will just give you a high level. Yeah, there are multiple ways of doing it. So if you have a JSON file, it's a very specific question, by the way. But I do understand what you're looking for. So either you do this, you read that application. So there's something called read and write, right? When you're reading or writing any payload, you can do in a specific format. I'm just missing the keyword there. So when you do that, if you're reading an application as a JSON, then it will actually remove those characters. Or else use this, and probably I will type it into the chat, and you can actually copy it from there, right? So let me do that, and you go into the next question, but I'll put in the chat. You can copy it next time.
That is great. Thank you, Amit. And I believe that you guys have links to share for additional readings on the skills, so the audience get more details coming up. Yeah,
so we are sharing our blog that we wrote, Amit and I. Do make it a point to read. We have included a lot more details than we discussed today, with a lot of hyperlinks in the blog. It's a lot of good information, and hopefully it will take care of all your migration needs. Again, we want to make sure that you are aware of our Catalyst Knowledge Hub. Whenever Amit or I get engaged in customer conversations with our experience, we build assets which are published to Catalyst Knowledge Hub. So please make sure you check it out consistently. Yep. I think next item is the trivia winners. I'm going to let Jimmy announce those. Jimmy, you there?
All right, perfect. Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, Amit, very much. It was an amazing presentation and demo. Also, thank you, Mandy, for presenting the customer point of view and taking care of all the questions coming from the audience here. Last thing before we announce the winners, I have posted in the chat like a quick Google form just to give, would like to hear from you about your review about the meetup and how we can improve in the future. Also, there was a section if you can, or if you want to suggest future topics to be addressed in future meetups. So please click on that link, and it's very, very short form. It shouldn't take more than 2 to 3 minutes. All right, so 4 minutes left. Let's go ahead with the trivia winners. The first question, let's go to the first question, Sandeep. First question, identify all of the components which are managed by Mulesoft for runtime fabric deployment model. And the right answer is B. And the winner for the first question is Kevin Ford. Congratulations, Kevin.
Congratulations.
Next one. Question 2, which are the operating systems supported by runtime fabric appliance model? And the right answer is D. The winner for this question is Kirion Ing. Congratulations, Kirion.
Congratulations, Kirion.
Congratulations.
Next one.
Yep.
All right, third one. Which of the following deployment models can leverage the Anypoint security product for securing network traffic coming into Mule applications? The right answer is C, and the winner is Tuhinava Das. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Congratulations, Tuhinava.
Congratulations.
Perfect. Thank you all very much. That was very, very helpful. Thank you again, Amit, Sandeep, and Mandy, and looking forward to more of these kind of interesting and engaging meetups. Okay, thank you all. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Jimmy, for hosting us. Thank you.
Right.
Thanks.
Bye.